Okay, it's 7 o'clock, so we'll make a start. Welcome to the Audit Committee. I'm particularly pleased tonight to welcome Michael Drake, our new independent member of the committee. Thank you ever so much on behalf of all of us for giving up your time to do the role. I'm sure you'll be an excellent addition to the committee, so thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I'm very pleased to be here and I look forward to contributing in any way I can.
Fantastic, thank you. Also very pleased to have Susan, our Chief Executive, Susan Parsonage, with us. Welcome. Andrew, would you be able to just introduce everyone else that we have online, please, and what their roles are, just so that everyone's clear? Thank you. Thanks.
So, we've got Graham Cadle, who's the Assistant Director for Finance. We've got, hi Graham. We've got Helen from EY. Perhaps you could, hi Helen. And is there a colleague from EY, Helen?
Yes, Stefan's here as well.
Oh, hi Stefan. And I think that's everybody, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have?
I'm here as well.
Okay, we've got.
Sorry, I was
joining us online.
Yeah, I was a bit late coming back, so I better join online.
Okay. Okay, do we have any apologies?
No apologies, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Are we all happy that the minutes are a correct record of the meeting? Councillor G?
Yes, sorry. I did request that outside of the meeting we get a more detailed explanation how the assets were accounted for and an estimate of the amount taken out of cost and accumulated depreciation or not taken out. And I know we've got an updated explanation this evening, but we haven't yet got an estimate. And I'd just like it noted that we still don't have the estimate that I requested.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. We do have an item on that, obviously, but not quite exactly what you...
Not exactly.
Okay,
yeah, thanks.
Right, thank you. Councillor Harper?
Yeah, so in the minutes, it correctly states that I asked for some historic data in relation to the complaints information. There was some further data that came out, but that actually only had, I think, 2 years information, and it focused quite a lot on the fast track versus the stage 1. My request was for a longer historic period in terms of the overall complaint, so less about the split between fast track and stage 1, more about the overall pattern of complaints within the council. So if perhaps I can have that followed up and that information sent to me.
Yep, that's fine. I'll follow that and see if we can get that for you. All right. Any other comments on the minutes? Are we happy that they're a correct record? Yep. Okay. Thank you. Any declarations of interest? No? Any public or member questions?
No questions.
Okay, so we'll move on to the first substantive item then, which is an update on the 2021 statement of accounts. Who's going to be leading on this item, please?
I introduce it, Chair, and then Helen can probably lead on the actual report, if that's okay, Helen. So just, I guess, to remind everybody of where we've got to, we substantially finished the audit and had a sort of final draft of the audit report on the 2021 accounts earlier in the year. And at that point, there was 2 outstanding issues that stopped us from sort of completing and asking, hopefully, for final sign-off. One of those was the pensions matter, where we need the accounts of our pension fund to be signed off. And the second was a matter around infrastructure. The pension matter affects all of Berkshire, and we had hoped that would be signed off in terms of the accounts by September, which hasn't happened. The infrastructure issue, which we'll talk about in detail and take you through the detail of the report, is a national issue. It was one that was identified in an audit meeting, an auditors meeting a few months ago, and affects most authorities, I would say, throughout the country. There was a proposal that CITFA put in place, an interim arrangement, but they haven't been able to come up with an interim arrangement at the moment, so that matter is still outstanding. So we had hoped when we gave you an update at the last committee that by this time we would have been able to complete the pension issue and be able to put forward a proposal of how we dealt with the infrastructure issue. Because the pension issue remains outstanding and our latest timescale for that to be resolved is November, we're not going to ask, fingers crossed, we're not going to be asking for you to make a decision on the infrastructure item and therefore the impact on the accounts. We just wanted to give you some more detail and understanding of what that issue was and the options we will be able to take, hopefully, when we come and meet back in November. Is that helpful and makes sense?
Yeah, I think that's good. I don't know if Helen, if you want to follow on or.
No, I mean, Graham summarised the position well. I think if I deal with the pension fund issue first, I think we're all somewhat frustrated because we had expected and had been told that the 2021 accounts for the pension fund would be considered at the Audit Committee for RBWM last week. From our review of the website for RBWM, they only considered 2019-20, and actually we don't know the outcome of that yet. I have been chasing the partner at Deloitte for an update because they had said they would give us, they would let us know if their timetable was going to slip, and unfortunately I haven't been able to get that before this meeting. So we will continue to chase that to try and get that through. In terms of infrastructure, Graham summarised it well. Obviously, there's more detail in the next paper, so I might hold off to that. But I did just want to pick up on Councillor G's point about an estimate that she requested at the last meeting. Clearly, I wasn't there, but one of the reasons why you've not received that information is that to be able to even attempt to get to close to an estimate would require a significant amount of work by officers. And neither Graham nor I felt that was a good investment of time, whilst there are still sort of decisions to be made about what is going to happen with infrastructure. So it is not that we have failed to deliver something that had been requested. It's more that we've taken a judgment that it needs to wait until we know really what we're doing.
I add to that, Chair, please.
Sure, yeah.
So, yeah, thank you, Helen. And sorry, Councillor G. As Helen's explained, and I thought we'd answered it, so my apologies if you've expected something else. The whole issue is the amount of work we would require to detail this information, when in fact there may be a change in the requirement, is the reason we've got this matter outstanding. So it's as Helen's explained, it would be almost impossible to give any sort of estimation of the value without doing all the work, which may then not be required, and it is why the issue is outstanding. The point and the reason I thought we'd explained it is what we did get out is we can show that whilst the valuations are wrong, it's a net nil difference. It's a balance sheet in and out item and doesn't affect the overall sort of bottom line position.
Okay, thank you for that, Graham. So just to summarise then, at the last meeting, we did hope to have resolution on both of the issues by this meeting. The pension accounts we hope to be signed off by November. We're also hoping for an update from CITFA on the infrastructure assets piece soon. So this report is just given to us by way of an update. We're not making any decisions on it this evening. It's to give us information to prepare us for next meeting, November, where we will make a decision on how we take this forward. Is that a fair summary from your point of view?
Yeah, and I think, Chair, we're more positive that hopefully the pensions will be resolved. If CITFA don't come up with the infrastructure answer, then we will have to probably choose between option A and B that are in the paper in front of you now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So members, do you have questions? Can we keep the sort of detail on the infrastructure to the next item, the questions on this particular item? So I've got Councillor Kaiser and then Councillor Harper and then Councillor G.
Good evening, Graham and Helen. I'm always suspicious, having been on the pension board, that they've delayed it, and there's a reason that they're delaying it. And what concerns me is that they're not going to ask us for any more money. What do you know about that, Graham? Do you think that's likely to happen?
No, I don't believe that's likely at all. The review will be of the fund and the amounts to be put in the fund would be separate. They have issued a letter which gives almost the guarantee we need that the work's complete, but it just has that sort of caveat in, and Helen will remember the wording better than I do, that just says barring they find anything else. So it's kind of a cover-all for them. So we fully expect this is just them going through due process. Nothing will be found and they'll sign it off. But until that final sign-off has gone, there's that risk, and therefore our auditors are not happy to sort of sign off the accounts. Is that fair, Helen?
Yes, I mean, what I was just going to add, Graham, is, and to your point, Councillor Kaiser, is I don't believe it's an issue with the pension fund itself that is causing the delay. The delays have been caused by by issues that I think Deloitte have been dealing with on the council's accounts. So for 2019-20, I understand they had a number of objections that needed to be resolved, and that held them up significantly. And so their caveat on the letter that we require for us to be able to sign off your accounts is basically until they have completed the audit on the 2021 Royal Borough Windsor of Maidenhead accounts, they don't have sufficient assurance that there might not be something, if that makes sense, that could affect the pension fund. So Graham's absolutely right. We have a letter that pretty much tells us that everything is fine, but they have included a caveat, which means if I was selected for a quality review, and we would be hard pushed to be able to demonstrate we had sufficient assurance because of that caveat, which is a slightly frustrating position to be in.
Councillor Harper?
Graham, you mentioned November as a target date. I mean, do we have any confidence in that date? Is there a meeting scheduled before the end of November to sign the pension accounts off?
There will be a bit. So as Helen, I think we both mentioned, I think it was last week, wasn't it, that their accounts committee saw the 1920 accounts. But in fact, Helen and I was talking, and those papers were only issued, I think, the day before. So there'll be a lot of work going on in the background. As Helen's mentioned, her and audit partners are trying to get that assurance on the audit side, and we're speaking to officers on the council side. So our best estimate on what we're told to date is that November will be achieved. But I think it's fair to say there's a level of risk to that.
I think, Graham, you chose a different word. I might have used the word scepticism, but we are doing everything we can, both on the officer side and on the audit side, to secure a more precise date as to when we will get the letter for the pension fund. That effectively will determine whether or not we can meet the November date, because, as Graham explained earlier, if we get that pension fund letter, then there comes a decision point really around the infrastructure issue.
Chair, I just wonder if there's any leverage that perhaps our chief executive might be able to write a letter to RBWM to express our frustration at the delays and ask them to pull the stops out.
It maybe, I know Graham Ebers, Section 151, has been working hard, I think formally and informally, to make sure they're moving forward. It may be something Susan want to.
Yeah, I can do that. I've just realised I didn't turn my microphone on, so I can link up with Graham, and I can do that for sure. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor G.
Yes, so we're in a period between when the pension accounts, when the year end is, and before they're signed, and there are post-balance sheet events to consider. Generally speaking, there wouldn't be anything that happened these days that at this point that would affect so far back, except for the matter of insolvency. So with the catastrophic reaction of the markets recently, particularly the gilt market, to what's been going on politically, I was reading something today, which is that the Bank of England is seeking to reassure the markets so that defined benefit pension schemes don't end up insolvent. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, Helen and Graham, of in fact the pension scheme accounts being even further delayed due to the collapse in the gilt market. Thank you. Or in fact the FTSE.
If I start, and then maybe Graham can finish off. I suspect that is a matter that will be vexing all of us who are auditors with pension funds, regardless of whether it's 2020-21 or 2021-22 in terms of post-balance sheet events. It also impacts all councils in the consideration of their going concern disclosures as well. So that will be something that we would be following up as well from a Wokingham perspective in terms of, is there any impact from all of these current events? I think it's difficult to assess, and we will need to see how things pan out over the coming weeks. Events seem to be moving remarkably quickly, but I read similar articles about the bank's intervention today to try and avoid an immediate problem for pension funds.
So just to clarify that, could there be a problem with signing off the pension scheme accounts that have not yet been signed off due to current market, the state of the current market, do you think? Because it is a going concern issue and it might delay even more.
I don't think I would want to say definitively that it will delay it or not, but it certainly needs to be considered, and there is the potential that could then further delay. However, it is a disclosure issue, and therefore there should be a way, there should be some consideration of that. But I think it is too early to make a definitive comment on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, by all means, yeah.
Thank you. I'll just pick up Maria's point. Normally, it would be an unadjusting post-balance sheet event if it was valuation. I think in a multi-employer scheme like yours, I think if one of the employers were to go insolvent, that perhaps would be an adjusting event. But my question is rather intrigued on the audits being required, because the way defined benefit schemes are normally set up, an actuary will perform a triennial valuation and look at assumptions, look whether, to be honest, any members have died and mortality rates, things like that. And then for the IAS 19 figures that are used for the financial statements, then they would use the assumptions on the triennial valuation. And normally the disclosures for accounts are prepared about 3 weeks after a year end. So I'm rather intrigued what's different about this scheme, what audit is required.
I'm going to be honest, I'm not entirely sure I understand the question enough. So if I apologise if I don't answer, if I don't get it quite right in my response. So we are required to audit the accounts of the pension fund scheme. So, but in this case, Berkshire Pension Fund. So that includes all of the information. You are quite right. Yes, there's an actuarial valuation on which the pension fund auditors rely on, and on which we rely as part of our procedures for Wokingham Borough Council. All of the procedures that we are required to do, and all of the procedures that the Berkshire Pension Fund auditors are required to do, have largely been completed. However, they have, under the audit, what used to be the Audit Commission protocol. So the protocol for local government auditors is that rather than each auditor for the councils in Berkshire asking Berkshire Pension Fund for details of how they run the pension fund and to get assurance, the pension fund auditor does it once and then provides assurances to all of us. And that's the letter that we are waiting for. But the audit of the pension fund is always going to be required. Have I missed the point?
It might be something particular with local government. I mean, my experience is mainly commercial, but certainly all PLCs would rely on the actuaries' valuations, and they're able to publish accounts and certainly commercial sensitive information within a few weeks of their year end.
If I may try and assist, and I may not be answering the question either, but I think, as you say, there's the actuarial review and the numbers and the balance. I think the audit approval that we get more widely covers that, but also the governance around it and the wider arrangement. So that's what I think we get as an assurance, that not only those actuarial numbers are right and the fund's right, but actually all the governance and the other arrangements are appropriate and apt, and accounts are declared in the right way. So I think it's just a slightly wider piece of work than just those numbers that come off the actuary.
Fine, it must be a particular additional requirement you then require over and above public companies.
I think the audit is largely similar. I mean, the audit approach that we would use for pension funds in the public sector is largely the same as in the private sector, but I think there are probably issues around the timing of the production of the accounts and then the timing of the audit that goes with that may make the difference. So if I think about my corporate colleagues, they are obviously working to very different timescales, quite often in the preparation, for the preparation of the accounts and then the audit of those accounts to meet the deadline, the group reporting or statutory accounts deadlines.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Maher online, did you have a question?
I did. I think we've been reading the same articles, but just another thing that came up really was how many of the councils are affected by this, just to get a kind of a range.
In relation to the pension fund issue,
yeah, and therefore not able to sign off their accounts as well.
So if all audit firms take the same approach, it would be all of the Berkshire councils, Berkshire councils who are admitted bodies to the Berkshire Pension Fund. So that's 6 or 7, I think, Graham.
And the fire service presumably as well?
And the fire service, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Kaiser?
So sorry, jumping again. What this does bring, what concerns me about this for the council is, what would happen if Windsor and Maidenhead get a set of accounts which are qualified? What impact does that have on it? That's the first question. But the second question, I think, goes more importantly to what our responsibilities are as a council. We are a major contributor to this pension fund, and we have nobody on the trustees board that's got a vote. Do you not think at this time, because of all the problems we've had, we need to push that button and explain to them, as we do make a major, I'm not sure whether we're the biggest, we may be the biggest actually, but we should have a vote on that trustees board, which we don't currently have. And that's that is just something that's happened in history. But it does concern me that this is so closely wedded to the accounts that Windsor and Maidenhead have had.
So shall I take the first question, and then I think Graham might be better placed to answer the second question? Or in terms of if the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead accounts are qualified, so the council accounts are qualified, unless it was directly something to do with the pension fund, it would not impact on the assurance letter, I would think, that we would get. If the Berkshire Pension Fund accounts are qualified, which we are not expecting based on the conversations that we've had with Deloitte and the draft letter that Graham referenced earlier, then that would be something we would need to take into account, and we may need to do further procedures of our own to get satisfied that the disclosures in your financial statements are correct. But our understanding at the moment is there are no concerns over the Berkshire Pension Fund statements. The 2019-20 audit opinion that RBWM considered at their committee last week appeared to be unqualified.
Graham, did you want to come in on the point about the trustee on the pension fund board?
I did. I'm afraid I'm not going to be hugely helpful because I haven't got much of the history of what our position is and why, but I'm very happy to take away an action to have a look at that and firstly give an update on the position and maybe some consideration, speak to Graham Ebers at 151 about what our options might be in that regard, that we can protect our position and have more input going forward.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions or comments on this particular item? No? Okay, if we can move on to the infrastructure piece then. Helen, did you want to summarise the report further before we discuss?
Yeah, I'll summarise it, but I won't go through it in detail, Chair. So what we have aimed to do within this paper is to set out the background, what the accounting requirements are under the CIPFA code, an overview of the position at Wokingham, but that is very much an overview. In reality, for the same reason that I mentioned earlier, we don't want to ask officers to do unnecessary work at this stage that may not have been required and that will take their time away from, the important thing of keeping things going from a Wokingham perspective. We've then also included the options to move forward alongside the possible implications. And then finally, we've included an example, and I can't stress enough that it is only an example of how the audit report might look if we were to go down the limitation of scope route. But as Graham said earlier, I think it's also really important that we're not asking you to make a decision on this tonight. We're trying to give you some information to give you the background. So I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I'm sure everyone will have read it, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Helen. Questions, comments from the committee? Councillor G, yeah.
Yeah, I'm still not, I understand the bit about the assets that have been fully depreciated but not derecognised, there's no effect. But I think you're going to have to take me through again where an asset is not fully depreciated and has a positive net book value at the year end, but it's been replaced or recommissioned or decommissioned, the error will also impact the balance sheet where asset values will be overstated, but this will not affect the overall reported financial position of the council. Well, if you've got a debit sitting in your net assets and that shouldn't be there, how can it not affect the overall financial position of the council? And this refers also to the fact that the qualified audit opinion says we don't know if the net book value is correct. So I'm just not following that bit. Thank you.
So the reason why it won't affect the overall financial position of the council is because all of these entries are reversed out through the MERS, one way or another. Aside the movement in reserve statement. So it's one of the primary statements in your financial accounts. So the way in which, and I may need Graham to enter in, but that I think was the thrust of the paper that you provided after the last committee, Graham, was to try and show that the flow of the accounting entries is that, yes, it does impact the gross book value, the gross accumulated depreciation, and it works its way through, but then all of those numbers effectively reverse back out through and various different adjustment accounts and reserves. And ultimately, other than in very limited circumstances, it's not going to make a difference to your reported income and expenditure.
Okay, so I understand that at financial accounting level then, the financial reports will have it reversed out. I think I'm going to require some explanation at some point about the effect that it has on the asset values reported in the medium-term financial plan, which, Helen, I know is not your responsibility, especially where we use asset values to calculate things. And also, I don't understand why it won't affect the general fund if it's not reversed out, if it's only reversed out when we produce the financial accounts. So I think we're going to need that information going forward.
Councillor, just to add, we sent that, I say clarification, as Helen said, it's not an easy clarification, but it showed the different accounting entries. I think fundamentally the difficulty is what is the value of a road, and the way the accounting has worked historically is clearly not pure in an accounting term, but it is netted out. It comes back to naught. For us to do a significant amount of work to actually try and work through to a real value will be a huge amount of work. I can't remember the year, Helen may remember, but I think it was probably 10 years ago, there was a piece of work to try and value all such assets. And it was actually aborted because it became such a cumbersome effort and such a large number that really didn't mean anything. It wasn't taken further. And I think that's an example of where we're at. There is a number. I guess candidly, it doesn't mean a huge amount because it's not. We can't sell a road, but it does net out and off into reserve accounts that we don't use, that don't affect the revenue account or a general fund. They come back to naught. And I guess what SIPFA are trying to work out is what way going forward can we make this not a bureaucratic nightmare and demand on councils where in essence it doesn't add a huge value, because we can't, it's not like a hotel or a building that we could sell and therefore is important, it goes nowhere. I'm not sure that's helped massively, but hopefully tries to explain, I guess, the conundrum of how we can get a real value that means something without creating an unnecessary resource impact.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith next.
Mine's a slightly easier question, I think. I'm struggling to understand why we've got these loose ends, so to speak. You've given us two options, and at the bottom of those you say we're aware of two councils audited by ourselves that have taken option 2. But that sort of begs the question, well, how many have gone with option 1 and how many haven't, are sitting on the fence like we are, please?
So basically, at the moment, there are the two councils that I referenced in the report that have accepted a limitation of scope. One was for a 2021 audit. One, I believe, might have been for a 2019-20 audit. Of the rest, all are at various stages of discussions, but I would say most are now, it's swung a little bit over the summer. So I think a number of councils were tending towards maybe going down the limitation of scope route just to get their accounts closed and move on. However, I think the timing now of when SIPFA has saying that they may produce more information led in combination with the fact that the deadline, for want of a better word, for the annual accounts is the end of November this year. I think most have said that they would now prefer to wait to see what the SIPFA solution is. In the case of the two councils referenced, one I think just absolutely wanted to get their accounts done, and there were a number of circumstances for the other. So the vast majority at this stage who have not got their accounts signed either for 2021 or earlier years are currently waiting.
Could I just add to that? I think whilst we wouldn't want that pension issue, in some ways the pension issue makes the current position a bit clearer for us. If our pension issue was sorted out, then it might be a closer call about whether we go with a limitation or whether we hold for SIPFA. Because of the pension issue, we wouldn't want a wider qualification. Actually, it makes sense to hold, wait for SIPFA, and hopefully both matters will be resolved fairly quickly.
I think, if I may just add, in terms of timetable, I think when I wrote the report was at a point in time, I think that the solution that DLUC are considering, the statutory instrument or a statutory override, the timetable for that has slipped because there was further delays in Parliament due to the funeral of the Queen, the death and then subsequent funeral of the Queen. They're in conference season. To pick up an earlier point around, there are some economic issues that probably require attention right at the moment. Quite where that will sit in the pecking order of DLUC priorities, we don't know. So I think the pause is probably appropriate because we have the option to wait until November to make a decision, and then I think we will get some clarity for what other councils are doing as well. What I should say or re-emphasise, I think, apologies, is neither SIPFA nor DLUC may be the magic solution. It may still be an issue of such magnitude, that we can't get sufficient assurance. So, there is a query over whether it will actually resolve the picture completely.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kaiser.
The only thing I would say when valuing assets for councils, I mean, we're either the largest or the second largest landowner in the borough. Land's probably more expensive here than almost anywhere else. in this part of the world. And we see Slough digging themselves out of the hole by selling their assets, and they're finding their assets are worth significantly more than they actually stand in their books. And I know for a fact from stuff I've done, I've looked at some of the land that we own that we've got standing in hundreds of thousands of pounds, and where we've decided to develop it, it's now worth millions of pounds. So it's a really difficult situation to try and value. It's not just roads, it's everything. How you ever get to a position where you value those assets, I just don't know.
Okay. And Councillor Davis.
Thank you. The 2 points. The first one, the second point was echoed the fact we haven't got to make a decision because we've got to wait on the pensions issue. So thankfully that's slowed us down. I understand Councillor G's concerns around the complexities here. I mean, we're all potentially financially literate. Our electorate aren't, our constituents aren't, and they will care about this if it was raised in the wrong way. Graham, would it be possible for you to provide a brief summary of wherever these assets are being stated in accounts, the medium-term financial plans, an example, I just checked, I couldn't see where that was contained, where carriageways were contained other than the costs, just to give us some confidence where they might be stated and that they are backed out, and maybe a really layman how it's done. You've done it excellently for the wider situation that we know they come out of the MERS. If there are any other places it might occur, it just means nobody's going to get a shock in the future. Thank you.
Graham, did you want to come back on that, or?
No, happy to do that. I was going to make a comment that if a member of the public can find them in there, I think we should maybe offer them a consultancy
Give them an award, yeah.
But yeah, no, happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, sorry, I just had one.
I'll take Councillor Maher, then Michael, then Councillor G.
Sorry, the point made about SIFA, waiting for SIFA to come back to us. And they may or may not, given the time, etc. Are we actually proactively chasing them up to say, I mean, how difficult can it be to get a decision or on a particular condition? So are we sort of actively chasing them to get that?
Want to go first, Helen, or shall I? Well, I could.
You go first, and then you go first.
So we are. I say chasing them up. We're getting constant updates. I think, in fairness to SIPFA, I think they have listened to the concerns from local authorities in terms of the amount of effort and work and value add this calls. So I think their problem is genuinely coming up with a solution that's commensurate for the issue, but helps add a bit of value in the counts around the sorts of issue Councillor G is talking about. So I think it is just very complex to get that balance, and they're trying to come up with something that works.
And I think if I just add to that, SIPFA can't agree it in isolation. Once they have a proposal, it needs to go to the Financial Reporting Advisory Board, also called FRAB, which is effectively a government body that sort of looks at accounting issues across the whole of the public sector, because whilst this is very much currently a local government issue, there's a much broader issue around valuation for public sector assets, in part to pick up Councillor Kaiser's point from earlier. It's difficult, it's complex, there's a lot of judgment and estimation uncertainty involved in all of that, and then you have market movements that can change very rapidly. So there is a wider project going on across the whole of government about the extent to which valuations I'm quite trying to choose my words, the extent to which valuations are important, and therefore note the extent to which the international financial reporting standards which are currently applied should or should not be applicable. So there's quite a lot going on in that arena, but it's unfortunately it's not as simple as SIPFA saying, here's a solution, go away and that's job done. They have to get it approved through other accounting boards.
Okay, thank you. Michael?
Thank you. Just to close the loop on Councillor G's first point, are you saying the profit and loss on disposal of fixed assets goes below the surplus or the deficit for the year through reserves? Is that how you account in local authority rather than in the current results for the year?
Other than for investment properties and assets held for sale, yes.
Okay. So that's the first point. The second point, looking at the audit qualification for the year. Potentially, I know you say it's very first draft. When I read this over the weekend, I was a little bit shocked because it looks as if it's inadequate accounting records and things, and I'm sure Graham would be very concerned to have that. And I was a bit surprised there wasn't a mention that actually the ongoing points were raised in effect by CITFA to the NAO Tech Group, is that what it's called? And I would have thought it's almost a technical issue, this is. And at the moment, it looks as if we're not keeping accounting records, and it's actually quite damning for the council.
So this is a point that's been raised multiple times, and I completely understand the view of councils that it is quite damning. However, it is also accurate. If we step back and think about it logically, the CIPFA code was brought in 2010-11 with international financial reporting standards. It set out what was required to be done, and it hasn't been done. So by almost everybody, in fairness, apart from a very small number of councils. Also, in fairness, auditors have not necessarily been looking at it in detail over those 10, 11 years. So, I'm not in any way trying to throw stones. I'm from your background, Michael, it sounds like you're used to it, but audit reports are very stark. They always are. It's black or it's white. There is very little in an audit report where you explain the background to it. So the background comes through the paper that we've produced today and the discussion that we are having. It will come through in the audit results report. Should it go down a limitation of scope route, the background will be clearly set out in our reporting through the audit results report, through the auditor's annual report. But the audit report itself does become really quite stark. And if you looked at any qualification, it's pretty much usually the same. But sadly, I have to know.
I'm still surprised the context isn't put there and the background to it. But I guess it's up to the finance staff and the councillors to put it in the context in the annual report and explain what the issue is.
Exactly.
Explain why you've issued this report.
Apologies, I talked over you. I didn't mean to. You're right. I would, if we were to go down this route, my recommendation would be that you use your narrative report, which is the front end of the financial statements, and you use the notes within the financial statements to include that. In fairness, I haven't included the whole of the report. There are other references as it goes through, but it would be your own disclosures that we draw attention to effectively. So you would then be able to set out the reasons behind it.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take Councillor G, then Councillor Smith. Two more questions.
So, in effect, we have been keeping inadequate accounting records, but there's an historic reason for that. I can't quite reconcile that in my head. And also, with reference to Councillor Kaiser's point, just because something is difficult doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing it. So the fact that we have got a big property portfolio and it is very large and complex is all the more reason, I believe, to keep proper and accurate accounting records. With respect to it won't make any difference to the financial position, I'm not convinced about that. So I went back and checked what Graham has said about the adjustments. Yes, it gets reversed out in the general fund, but the place it gets reversed out of is the capital adjustment account, which is written down as an unusable reserve. And I don't know at the moment how much that might be. And that's my issue. If it were, I think I could probably live with if everything was depreciated to zero. I wouldn't be terrifically happy about gross cost and accumulated depreciation both being overstated, but I could live with it. The fact that I don't actually know and I can't put a reasonable figure on how much of that 164.7 million net book value shouldn't be there, albeit that it gets reversed into the capital adjustment account, makes me very twitchy. And I therefore don't really like even the qualification, and I don't like not knowing, and that's my basic issue with the whole thing. And I appreciate the arguments about cost. I'm just expressing my disquiet about where we are, although I appreciate the historical reasons for it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Smith?
Sorry, Chairman, could I
come back? Yeah, of course.
I think it's really important not to conflate the whole property portfolio and infrastructure assets
Helen,
in this discussion.
Of course.
Sorry, because otherwise in saying the whole property, you're kind of contaminating everything else. Infrastructure is very specific,
yes,
and there are very specific historic reasons for that.
Yeah, sorry, I appreciate that. I was just trying to put an alternative view to what Councillor Kaiser had said about the whole land portfolio. Just because something's difficult doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And therefore, with infrastructure, and I know this problem is only infrastructure assets, roads and bridges and stuff like that. I do know, but I wanted to make the point that the more complex something is, the more difficult it is, the more reason you should have for doing it. So I was, I guess, contradicting Councillor Kaiser's view on the whole of the asset portfolio. Thank you.
Okay, can I take Councillor Smith next, please?
Well, really, I was going to build on the point made by Mr. Drake that the way it reads at the moment as your draft, it does seem to castigate us for not having proper records for the last 10 or 12 years. And if that's the same situation with every council in the land, that's not just context, that's a fact. So we are not alone in doing this. We're doing it because it's all too difficult. So I would not be happy with the wording as it currently stands.
I do understand councillors' concerns. I would also remind you that it is our report as Ernst & Young, and therefore the wording of the report will be our wording. I'm really sorry to say it as bluntly as that, but I think it's important that I remind you of that fact.
But you have a sentence that says this note provides management's explanations. Is that your management or ours?
Apologies, let me just open it.
In the last sentence, first paragraph, the basis for the qualified opinion.
Well, so what we're doing with that paragraph is saying that that to the point that we made earlier is that you will make your own disclosures about the rationale and the reason behind if we get to this point, the inability to account, the difficulty of doing so, or the inability to do so, or however it's put, and that will be your words about the position that you are in, and we are referencing that. So that's where the context comes in.
Yeah. So there's not going to be much wriggle room in the audit opinion, and it's up to us, it's up to management to put forward that explanation as to why this has happened and set the context. Yeah, and we would absolutely work with management on that, because we would want that to reflect through in our wider reporting, not just the audit. So whilst the audit report is really quite inflexible, the remainder of our reporting is less so, and therefore we will be working with Graham and his team in this, if we go down that route, to ensure that we are consistent in what we are saying and that we explain it clearly enough.
I think if I may add, Chair, this is the position we find ourselves in. And Michael, I think, raised the point around it does feel really harsh and a little bit unfair in terms of all those accounts being in the right place and this one historical issue. But that's the balance we as the council will probably have to take in November as to whether we do a whole host of work to get rid of that and the time that would take and the resource, or whether in order to move forward we take the risk, and there'll be a bit of a reputational risk about the accounts being qualified in order to move on and then put it right. And that's why we brought the paper here, so you can understand what that really feels and looks like, so we can make that decision in the right way.
Okay, thank you.
And also, if I may add, to give you the time to think about it and the ability after this meeting to continue the discussions if there are other things. Because if we just land, what Graham and I were particularly concerned about was landing this on you in a meeting where we were also expecting you to sign the accounts, and that doesn't seem fair.
Okay, we'll take one last question from Mike.
Just finally, I suppose it's to emphasise that if we have this sort of qualified opinion, that will stand for at least 2 years, if not 3, because it affects your balance sheet, future income expenditure accounts. So whatever we accept here in November we'll have it next year and probably the year after.
Michael, you're quite right, unless in between the signing the accounts and taking the decision in November and signing the accounts, and then before we get to signing the 21-22 accounts, a separate decision is taken by either CIPFA or DLUC that would remove the qualification. So, which is what I was trying to say in the implications. So absolutely, you are right. If nothing changes, it stands for 2 or 3 years. If there is a change in the accounting requirements, then potentially the limitation of scope would go away and the qualification would go away.
Okay, thank you all for that discussion. It's a difficult and complex issue, but I did, personally, I found the report helpful. I think particularly setting out the 2 options and the pros and cons was personally really useful. So thank you for providing that. I'd like to move on to the risk register, which is our next item. Is someone going to introduce this, Andrew?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I can just introduce the report. So the committee will be well used to the format of this report by now. So this is your quarterly opportunity to consider and review the corporate risk register to determine that the strategic risks of the authority are being actively managed. And I just wanted to take you just as an overview to page 27, which is from paragraph 2.2. It talks about the analysis of the issues, effectively the changes since you last considered the report at the end of June this year. So we've got one new risk on there, which is around the implementation of the 2022 Elections Act. Fundamentally, or the main point around that is around the introduction of voter ID. And we, as an authority, are, like all authorities at the moment, are waiting for further detailed guidance around how we implement that and the costs of that. As I say, it's an issue for all local authorities, but when the corporate leadership team considered this issue, we thought it was of significance to add, albeit hopefully just in the short term through to May next year, this issue, so it gets the corporate focus that it needs. In terms of the first risk on the risk register that you consider every time, financial sustainability, just to flag up, and I guess it's no sort of surprise, but the position that the council finds itself in means that we've escalated that risk further in terms of the impact and likelihood of that risk. And I'm sure in a second when I hand over to the chief executive, she'll talk in a little bit more detail in terms of the broader context for that for the council. We've removed one risk from the register, which is the public protection partnership. So you recall this was about the transition of services from West Berkshire to Wokingham. That transition was, I would say, well managed, and it's now been de-escalated to the Directorate Risk Register for any remaining risks around that. And then fourthly, just to flag up risk number 2, which is governance, we've reduced the assessment of risk around corporate governance at this point in time, very much on the back of the work that we've been doing following the LGA's Corporate Peer Challenge last year and the actions that we've put in place, the improvements that we've put in place since then. Michael, for example, would be an example of one of those improvements in our corporate governance, bringing an independent member onto the Audit Committee, but there's a raft of other corporate governance improvements that we've put in place. So that's not to say that we're taking our eye off the ball of corporate governance, but it's just to recognise, I think, the journey that we've been on around that. So those are the main changes. I'm happy to come back later with any detailed questions that members have got around the register itself, but with your permission, Chair, I'll hand over to Susan to give the Chief Executive perspective.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andrew. So in terms of the risk register, as Andrew has highlighted, the increased risk that we've got is around financial sustainability, and that is the number 1 risk. So in terms of the council and its financial situation, it's no different than all councils across the country. It's an unprecedented time and situation that we find ourselves in. And one of the biggest challenges is the inflationary challenge, that the inflation is causing big impacts in terms of, for example, around utilities, around construction costs and the costs of our contracts as well. So that is having a big impact. At the same time, we have, following COVID, an increase in the volume of our cases with regards to, say, adult services and children's services and the complexity of those cases. So that is having an impact on the demand on those services and also the cost of those services. So, for example, the cost of placements where we may place vulnerable adults or children. Some of the drivers as well behind our increased costs include, for example, the fact that we've got an above average increase in our population, above average compared to the rest of the country. And at the same time, we've got some new incoming communities that actually mean diverse needs. So, for example, we have Ukraine, asylum seekers through Ukraine. We have communities from Hong Kong, and we have unaccompanied asylum seekers, children unaccompanied asylum seekers as well. And these, for example, the unaccompanied asylum seekers, children who are children, actually have an impact in terms of our children in care. So that's had quite an impact on the numbers of children in care as well. So I've talked about the cost of care placements for adults and children, and also workforce costs as well. So in terms of the financial side, we have those factors which are impacting, and there's a report going to overview and scrutiny next week, which is an overall sort of overview of the current situation, and Graham may want to come in a moment. So we're looking at this point in time at a shortfall of 4 million for 23-24, and however, we've also got on the horizon the local government settlement that's due to be announced in December 22, and that potentially may have an impact on that. There is a lot of work that's taken place to reduce that 4 million. The figure was also much bigger than that in terms of the gap, because there are lots of proposals to actually reduce the financial gap that we've had, and as I say, we've got more to do. So overview and scrutiny will start to look in more detail at the proposals that have been put forward, the type of thing that we're doing right now in terms of the financial situation, because we've got in-year pressures as well. So not only are we thinking about 23-24 and beyond, it's about the in-year pressures that we have. So, for example, we're holding vacancies across the departments and delaying recruitment as well, and really looking at maintenance and what different delays that we can make with regards to that particular situation. So quite a lot of pressures, and that's why we have increased that particular risk. I also wanted to talk about the health and social care risk, because just look at the number. So that is number 12 in your report, which is health and social care reform. And that is another risk for us. And it of course links to the financial risk as well, because the health and social care reform that we have on the horizon, which means a capping of care for our residents, disproportionately affects the borough. We've got a lot of care settings in this borough, over 50 care settings in this borough. And what it means is that there'll be a cap on what self-funders will need to pay, and the rest will be paid by the local authority. At the same time, the new reforms on the horizon, because they're not yet in place, the new reforms on the horizon mean additional sort of staffing responsibilities to meet those new reforms. So there's a significant potentially financial impact with the health and social care changes that could impact significantly on the budget in the future. And in terms of our ability to deliver as well those core adult services. So that is a pressure. And the third one that I wanted to raise, which again impacts on the budget, is around SEND and the sufficiency of provision. So we're having sort of discussions with Department of Education at the moment in terms of our provision around SEND, because of those changes in terms of our communities and movement of families into the borough. What it's had in terms of a pressure on school places and school places within the borough and also outside of the borough, and it has meant that we've had increased costs of moving children outside of this borough, which then has an impact on the budget. So what we're really looking at is how we can actually really put more provision in the borough and different types of provision in the borough, and look at how we might provide support earlier as well. So there's a lot of activity that's taking place in terms of coming up with an action plan that we'll be discussing with the Department of Education. I just wanted to highlight those 3 points because they're interconnected as well in terms of the financial impact and the financial sustainability that we have as an authority.
Okay, thank you, Susan. It's really good to get your perspective on that. Open it up to members. Questions, comments on the risk register? Okay, Councillor Kaiser first.
There's no question about it. These are even though we built 8 million in the last budget for growth and 8 million for inflation, 16 million, that's obviously not going to. I mean, there are issues which I was always. There are issues. One of the things I was concerned about was some of the offerings that we, with regards to Dinton Pastures, for instance, California, we tend to spend lots of money on those things, but we don't really know whether they make any money or whether they cost us money. I mean, we are getting to the point where we're going to have to look at what we have to do statutorily and if what we can cut back on that we aren't. And it would be a terrible shame to cut back on something like, let's say, I don't pick on it for any other reason, just having spent £6 million there, Dinton Pastures, if Dinton Pastures does make us money. But nobody seems to have any idea about that. And I think there needs to be more work done around that just so we can understand it better. Because I got a sneaking suspicion that places like Dinton probably do make money.
I think you raise a really important point in terms of commercialisation and how we think about bringing income into the borough and really understanding our assets and really understanding where we get income from those assets and we get a return on our investment, for example. So just in terms of actually addressing the sort of some of those core issues, we, so council introduced a change programme, if you like, an improvement programme earlier in this year, which covered a number of different factors, and one of those was around assets and another around contracts. So I see those two matters as really important in terms of actually driving efficiency, effectiveness, and also where we can maybe make more savings and ensure that we really, really understand and know our business. So really understand our business in terms of assets. And I think when we go through the process with overview and scrutiny, it will be really good as well to hear about your views on this in terms of and views and ideas as well. But for me, absolutely, assets are really important because we should understand. A point may be made, well, that asset brings an income. Well, yeah, as you say, Councillor, how much is the income? So really understanding that as part of an overall decision about particular assets.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harper.
Mindful we have a training course on the 27th of October, so my question may be answered by the training course. But I'm kind of interested in terms of the way the impact is measured for these risks. And it's a detail behind each of these risks that we can understand, or I can understand the kind of impact assessment and whether it's financial, reputational, those sorts of, operational, those sorts of impacts.
Yeah, I could take that. So in the risk management policy and guidance that it actually went to council last week, but it has been through the audit committee, it does show the criteria that are used to assess impact and assess likelihood. So there are sort of parameters, particularly financial parameters, that we try to sort of categorise those.
So for each of these risks, presumably there's more detail if we wanted it to understand how you're setting the impact in terms of red, amber and green.
Yeah, and perhaps it'd be helpful in terms of the presentation that we just add the key, if you like, in terms of that impact and likelihood assessment.
Yeah, I would say I think it's important to present it so that it's really clear and it's not too busy. I think it's changed quite a lot over the last few years, isn't it, in terms of how it's presented. I think generally the committee is happy with the format. If there are small tweaks, then yeah, we can look at that to make it clearer. But I think it's also important.
I don't want to clutter these things up. Exactly. But if I needed more detail on a particular risk, presumably I could get that separately. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Were you inviting comments just on the preamble to the risk assessments or to all the 18 risk assessments as well? Yeah. Okay.
Right, just say our role is to get assurance that risk management is happening appropriately.
Yes, so, I appreciate that. Because I understand the recommendation is that we review it and determine that they're being actively managed. I'm sure they are being actively managed. What I'm concerned about is which way the risks are going. Are they getting worse? Are they getting better? And I don't get this from here. I can see there's a target. I can see there's a position where we actually are. But I have no idea whether or not it's worse, better, or the same from last time.
If you look, the top right-hand corner of each page, there's a change bit there. So it says whether it's increased or decreased or stayed the same. It doesn't predict into the future, but it does show what's happened up to this point.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And similar to Councillor Hart's, I do really understanding how you move from one square to another. I understand Andrew there's a whole team looking at these, but just looking at from my perspective, how difficult is it to move some of these? So if I consider the risk on cybersecurity, which personal experience I think is a massive potential risk for any large organisation, public sector or other. Yet it doesn't seem to be concerning anybody terribly much.
Okay, that's a really good point, and I think there's a detailed answer to that, and that will perhaps come with putting together a risk training session for the committee in November, so we can sort of delve into more explicit detail about your specific question. But what I would say is we look at risk appetite in terms of trying to assess where we'd like a particular risk to be in a perfect world, and that's how we assess the desired movement of a particular risk. But as I say, in the detailed training course, there'll be more space and time to look at that process in more detail.
Okay, thank you. If I could bring in Michael, and then I've got Councillor Harper and Councillor G.
Thank you. I thought it was a very good summary, actually. Some of these risk presentations I've seen in the past are very, very difficult to digest. So I think the colour system works very well. A couple of just observations I had following the earlier discussions we have just had on the annual report and things. I wonder whether actually in the finance risk, whether we do have a reputational risk on having a qualified audit report, having 2 years outstanding accounts. I think that probably, and it's the first risk report I've seen where cybersecurity isn't high risk. I think most people would see it as right at the top and things very difficult to control. So maybe that's something that should be considered, really.
Yeah, I think they're both excellent points there. So I'll take both of those forward. I think particularly on the cyber risk, it's for all organisations. It's very, very topical. And I know when you looked at the annual governance statement as a committee, you made similar points there. So I will take that point away and we'll work further on that.
Thank you, Andrew.
Councillor Harper?
Just a suggestion about making the reports more easily visible in terms of changes to risk. So at the moment we've got this matrix with a warning triangle. But if it increases and decreases, we're not seeing the history. Maybe an arrow from one square to another, showing it going up, down, across, moving around so we can see where it came from and where it's going to.
Yeah.
That might be visually better.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, Councillor G, please.
Yes, so just picking up the harvest. Is the difference between sort of getting these reports between one and another? And I'm just wondering how we could fit in the general trends. Maybe a little graph rather than here, like that just shows the general trend down upwards. Otherwise, you can get fixated with one increase or decrease.
Oh, so sorry. Yes. So so for those online, so I didn't turn my microphone on. I was just responding to Councillor Harper's point about the changes, and I'm just wondering whether it might be useful to show longer term trends rather than just trends between one report and another, when we might get a bit fixated about one particular change rather than a trend, although that might be a good thing to get fixated on one particular change. I do have just a comment about the cost of living crisis, really. And I just want to ask whether things like civil unrest, for example, are considered in our major emergency response. And I'm sure the answer is probably yes, but I just want to check. And secondly, we have quite a lot of employees who are on lower levels of income, and councils are not renowned for paying well, generally. I mean, you might disagree with me, Susan, at the moment, but I'm just worried that given the cost of living crisis, have we considered that our ability to attract people or even to keep people will go down? I know it's mentioned, but it's not mentioned in relation to salary levels and the cost of living crisis. So it's mentioned in general terms, our ability to find people, but it doesn't mention pay. Thank you.
If I can come back on the workforce issue, absolutely, that the workforce issue, again, it's nationwide in terms of attracting and keeping people. And I think it will be particularly so in around here, as in terms of the cost of living here and the cost of housing and what that means for people. Absolutely, that is very much in our minds. So I know, for example, in Optalis, who we work with, in terms of they're attracting people, but that people are leaving at the same time in terms of carers. So it's social care workers. So it's absolutely a challenge, and it's very, very much in our sites.
Could we then mention that in the report?
Yes, we can.
And I've still got the other question about.
Chair, should I pick up Maria's question? So we're not actively planning for civil unrest as such. What we're planning is making sure our emergency response, whatever the actual emergency might be, is good. So we're very focused on that planning activity, and as I think I've said at this committee previously, there's a lot of learning that we have taken from the pandemic and our response to that, and that's what we're using to build more generic plans so we can be agile and responsive, whatever the thing is that we need to respond to.
Okay, on your point about perhaps introducing a graph, I think can we ask Graham to consider that? I mean, I'm concerned that it might make it too busy, and the most important thing is what is the risk now and what we're doing about it. It is great if you can see that detail, but if you're happy, then we'll consider whether we could do that, but without, not to the detriment of the presentation.
It is great the way it's evolved, and I really love the layout and everything. So yes, consider. I'm not requiring it or anything, just ask them to consider.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith.
Yes, actually, I would actually commend that, because having got a civil risk assessment from the Fire Authority is way more complicated. On risk number 4, uncontrolled development, we already have first case, as I understand it, going through of the proposed development just next door to the St Anne's Manor Hotel, as an example of uncontrolled development. So I'm slightly surprised that risk hasn't increased. But it's not continuing to increase, we don't have a lead plan. who challenges the assessment from the executive members' point of view? Is that the audit committee?
Let me answer the process point, and maybe Susan's would like to add to this. From a process point of view, so we have an Officer Risk Champions group, so every directorate is represented on that group. That group meets every month, and that's where we get the intelligence corporately in terms of where we are at a directorate risk level and what needs to be escalated or kept on the corporate risk. That the corporate risk report goes through the corporate leadership team. So again, you get the director, chief executive sort of overview and oversight of the corporate risk there. So that's where the process at an officer level lies. I guess the ultimate responsibility is the audit committee in terms of you seeking assurance from us as officers in terms of are the risks that haven't been identified or risks that you're not happy with in terms of the mitigating actions that we're pursuing. So I think the short answer is the audit committee has got the key member role to play with this.
Therefore, not sure whether I'm just a lone voice worried about this particular risk not being.
Sorry, could I just bring Councillor Davis in, because I think you had a related point, and then I'll come to you, Susan. Thank you.
It is. You're not a lone voice, Councillor Smith, and thank you for bringing it up. I think when we're measuring the likelihood of something happening, and we have it stated now that we do not have a 5-year land supply on 2 occasions, I believe, this is not a risk. This has happened. So it is at the very top, I would suggest. Whether the impact is still correct in that case could be debated.
I think that we'll take that away and absolutely take on board the comments that you've made, councillors. Absolutely understand where you're coming from.
Chair, I did have another point to make. Which one was? The one about the emergency response. It just really, should I as a councillor know more about what the gold, silver and bronze response structure is? I'm just completely not involved with it. Backbenching.
I mean, shall I just really? I mean, that's a sort of a quite accepted form of doing business, sort of resilience. So I suppose from an audit committee point of view, it's we want assurance that that's being done properly, and it's sort of being implemented in the way that it should. But it is, as I understand, it's quite a well recognised sort of system, isn't it? Where you have the really high level people, then the sort of next level down, and then the sort of manager type level, and each has their own role. And I'm sure you do kind of training where everyone knows what their roles are and scenarios and all of that. So. Would you like to expand?
It's exactly that. All I'd say to the committee, if you wanted more information, I'm happy to provide a sort of one pager in terms of this is how it works, just so you've got that information.
It's more a question of, in the event of some horrible emergency, really significant impact on the borough, what role, if any, are councillors expected to play? Is there scenarios for that, or is it just the officer response?
So it's a system. The gold, silver, bronze is a system that swings into sort of action when an incident happens. Or so, for example, during COVID, we had absolutely sort of gold, silver, bronze. So I chaired, for example, the gold meeting. Then we had the silver, which was mainly assistant directors, and then it's sort of the information, the actions, cascade through. We had them very regularly in terms of during COVID, as you would expect, and then they changed. They sort of changed in their sort of how often they were as we moved through the crisis. So I think that and during that time. We had a meeting with, if we think about the political side of things, regular meetings with the leaders of the different political parties, which was to keep the leaders informed about our response. So that was and then information to. And it was through those leaders, should I say, that the information cascaded to sort of groups. So I think it's how we think about, are there different things that we can do? Obviously, in different sort of situations, that's maybe something to think about. And if we do some more work around this, we can also think about what more could we do with regards to counsellors in different situations, because some of it depends on the type of crisis as well.
Sure. What kind of thing I had in mind? I mean, supposing there were derailment of a train carrying all sorts of volatile chemicals, it's going to be all over Twitter just instantly. What role can the council play in receiving information from the Dole Command, etc., and helping disseminate that into for example?
So, and I think that's really important, because councillors absolutely are critical with our communities and the links with our communities. So we did at times provide information like Q&As around sort of COVID, which was to enable councillors to answer questions. I think the difficulty at times is that we didn't always have the information, because the things were moving so quickly at different points. So, but I think you're absolutely right in terms of the point you're making about particular situations. I think we need to go back to the procedures and just do a sort of a recheck around that, because absolutely councillors are pivotal.
Okay, I'll take Councillor G, then I've got a couple of questions as well.
Yeah, I'm just going to respond to Mike's concerns. So I thought it worked really well at the beginning of the pandemic. So there was a lot for officers to do. So I think we let them get on with that for the first couple of weeks, but information was coming out about what was happening. And then every week, the leaders would go to a meeting and brief us. I think the thing which we absolutely couldn't do, which was very unfortunate, was meet in person. It would have been great, but we specifically weren't allowed to do that during the pandemic. But other than that, it did work. It did work, I thought, reasonably well. And then the leader of the council did send out briefings every week, and then you could see them coming through on the Wokingham newsletter as well. So I was pretty satisfied, certainly in the most critical periods, that we were getting the information that we needed. So I thought it worked very well.
Okay, thank you. I've just got a couple of questions and I'll come to you, Mike. So yeah, I had a couple of questions and a comment. So first question was on the budget and financial resilience risk. And I don't know if Graham might want to come in on this. So Susan, you explained really clearly the reasons why for the increased costs. We also know obviously that some of our income levels haven't recovered after COVID, which is having an impact. But specifically, I wanted to ask about the cost of borrowing, which you've also got listed in there. And after the last few sort of chaotic days economically, what is our exposure there? Is that going to go up the list in terms of our financial risks? How exposed are we on the cost of borrowing? And what sort of mitigations, if any, what levers do we have on that if it is a particular risk within that? That's the first question. Second one is on SEND, which Susan, you also mentioned. I just note there's a very big gap between where we are and where we want to be on that one. There's a particularly large divergence between those two. And you've got one sort of mitigating action at the bottom, developing the in-borough infrastructure, but it is, with respect, it's quite vaguely worded. So I don't know if you could expand on that a bit and give us perhaps more of a timescale so we can get a bit more assurance that we are doing everything we can on that risk. And then the comment was just about the elections risk. I think it's really good that you've brought that one in. I imagine the council will have a massive role to play in making sure that voters aren't disenfranchised when it comes to when that comes in. People that don't have ID or whatever and can't afford to pay for it, etc. So I think that's really good that you brought that one in. That sounds sensible. So yeah, if I could get a response on the cost of borrowing and the SEND risk, please.
So if I can answer about the SEND side of things. So I agree, more detail needs to be in here. For your assurance, in terms of a detailed plan that needs to be provided to the Department of Education, and that's going to be provided this week, tomorrow in fact, and tomorrow morning as well. I've been briefed on it, as has the portfolio holder as well, and we've also got a meeting with the leader and portfolio holder tomorrow morning as well, and it's got a lot of detail in there in terms of the plan and proposals to actually meet some of the challenges that we have. So so yeah, in terms of borrowing, I think I'm going to ask Graham to come in on that one.
Thank you, Chair. So, we're obviously reviewing the cost of borrowing position daily, and we have external experts to assist us with that. At the moment, the position has been positive for the early year because of the amount of our balances, and actually Treasury Management is showing a positive position against the budget. What we obviously have to do with what's happened in the last few days and what happens over the coming weeks is reprofile that again and see what that means. So overall, we are okay at the moment, slightly positive. What we also need to do, and it links to Councillor Kaiser's comments earlier on, is look at individual investments we might have. So, for instance, investment properties, and see what increased borrowing might mean on those, and whether that changes the dynamic of how much they return as an ongoing sort of revenue contribution. So it's okay at the moment. We're in a good position. We're monitoring it closely, and we need to do a bit of work around some specific investments.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Michael.
Yeah, just following up Councillor Smith's comments on risk 10 pandemic and emergency response. We've got that as the lowest possible likelihood. And I was just thinking, with the vaccination centres being set up again in the old library, things like that, perhaps it's not at the lowest likelihood because we are doing actions. And I wonder, part of the existing control is, and I'm wearing my other hat on some of the other roles I have, is engagement with voluntary sectors and partners. I know when the first pandemic happened, we did a lot of that as the council, and part of a mitigating action would be to build action plans with organisations to actually deal with potential risks under this area.
Yes, Chair, I'll take both of those points away.
Thank you.
Councillor Kaiser.
Just a couple of observations. I mean, Graham talks about Treasury Management. I mean, as a council, we have hundreds of millions of pounds invested in fixed term gilts and so on, and those are going to go up significantly. So they will offset some of the issues that we've got. But also an awful lot of our, correct me if I'm wrong, Graham, but an awful lot of our current borrowing is fixed, which means that it's very advantageous, even to extend it possibly because of the low interest rates that we're paying. I think last year we reported, not this year, but last year we reported that we'd reduced our borrowing by a whole 1%. And I expect a lot of those loans are still in place.
There are, Councillor, if I can add to that, although there is a large number of those loans that actually end during this year. Obviously impacts such as cutting the capital programme or revising the capital programme, SIL investments, etc., will affect what we need to reborrow. So we're working through that as part of the budget process that Susan spoke about earlier, and we're working through, and obviously things like the PWLB rate that's gone up significantly in the last few days are having to be taken into account and rescoped in terms of what those future decisions will be. So you're right, although there's quite a lot of borrowing that is literally coming to an end, and we need to work out what we will need going forward linked to our capital programme.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Councillor G?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I hope we haven't got hundreds of £millions in gilts, because the gilt market has just collapsed. So when interest rates increase, gilt prices, fixed interest gilts go down. So, Graham, we don't have hundreds of £millions in gilts, I hope.
I haven't got the figure in front of me. I can certainly look it out and share the position with the committee afterwards.
Yeah, in the Treasury Management reports, we used to have lists of what we had for our investments and what we had as the borrowings. And I think in this volatile situation, I'd like to see those again in the Treasury Management reports if we could. So going back to 2019, late 2019, early 2020. We had lists of those, so it might have been a bit over the top, but in this volatile situation, I think I'd like to see them again.
We've got one if the government no councils can't fail.
Except Slough, where we had.
Slough it's selling its.
Okay, well, we'll get an updated position from Graham on exactly what the position is so that we know where we are. Yeah, okay. Councillor Maher online and then Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I was just sort of looking at this more generically in terms of what the council does in terms of their activities. They're all about working for residents and communications and getting that communication out and on so many different activities that they undertake and to the different sectors within the community. I would have thought that there would have been some sort of a communication element somewhere in here to actually say that they're getting their message out or the information out. I know when COVID was going on, there was some good information that went out, but there is so much more that we do. And certainly that would, and not getting that information out to certain people in terms of what's available, especially with sort of hardship grants and things like this, could be quite detrimental to some people and how they can be helped. I would have thought there would be something on that in here. Just a view on that.
Would you like to come back on that?
So, yes, it's a really good observation. What I would say is that behind the corporate risk register, we've got detailed directorate risk registers and indeed individual project risk registers. So communications as an activity is something that would certainly be picked up at those levels. And I do say in the report as well that at the next meeting in November, I'll bring back some more information to you in terms of those directorate risk registers. But yeah, just to give you that assurance that communications is absolutely sort of on the radar in terms of thinking about risk and not communicating well, and how do we mitigate against that.
I think it's very important if you're going to be reporting on that you also report on the amount of allocated reserves that we've got that support these projects, because most of the projects we've been putting money into over the last few years, such as RE3, for instance. And I think that's important that's reported as well. I know the town centre, we've put money into that because nobody was quite sure where that was going at one stage. So that money still sits there and it hasn't been used yet. So it's not all doom and gloom, although it's not a good place to be. I think the biggest risk for us as a council is assumptions. We make assumptions. We've been caught out by two major assumptions. One is car parking, the amount of car parking that the income isn't coming through. And the second one is the buses haven't recovered. And so we've got no control over that, absolutely none at all. So when we make an assumption that the buses are going to go up to 90% or 80%, I mean, they're nowhere near that. They're still running at around about 70%. And for us, we've got to take the kids to school. We can't allow the bus services collapse. We've got to get the people to the hospitals and those sorts of things. So we're faced with a dilemma that we have to find that money from somewhere.
Okay. Any other comments, Susan? Did you want to come back at all on that? No.
In terms of just that point about communications and where we hold details about different risks. So on the SEND point we were talking about SEND before and the SEND action plan. So we've got a risk register associated with that SEND action plan that we're creating. So I wanted to reassure that we have got the risks identified at different levels in the organisation, as well as the overall sort of risks that we have here for the organisation.
Okay, thank you. Any more? Okay, one more from Councillor Smith then, and we'll move on.
Thank you. Risks 5, 11 and 17 are all related to, so just from a presentational point of view, it's all to do with SEND and school place. Just from a presentational point of view, it'd be really handy if they were closer together in the report, so I'm going to keep flicking pages and pages. But actually my question was, I really don't understand risk 11. And if you'll explain it to me. I understand we've got an increased demand, cost of SEND education, because we don't have provision on in the borough. And there's more kids needing it, but I didn't understand a bit about DFE requiring payment of money. Did they give us more money than we asked for and we've spent it?
I come back on
Please
that one.
do.
So it's with regards to, I was talking before about SEND, and we need to produce an action plan, which we're submitting to the Department of Education tomorrow. That's what this is about. And as part of that negotiation, because we'll go through a negotiation phase with the DOE, and that will be toing and froing about what we've got in our action plan. And there may or may not be funding attached to that as part of that discussion.
You've got £10 million overspend in the DSG.
Yep. Oh, I see what you mean. Right. So it's what Councillor Kaiser said. So we have a DSG issue, and the government wants us to reduce that overspend. So that's what it's the government is doing that with that approach, that what's called a safety valve approach, with a number of councils right across the country. So that where the government wants councils to reduce the DSG.
Actually been thick. So we've overspent by 10 million quid. Why would we having to pay 10 million quid on top of the overspending we spent back to the DfE? That sounds like 20 million quid you have to spend. Being a bit simplistic.
It's what in terms of the overspend, it's just the reducing the high needs block overspend. So that's what the government wants us to do, is to reduce it. And but it's, of course, that overspend has increased over time due to the pressures. So it's about bringing that overspend right down. That's what the idea is behind this plan.
Wording would require repayment.
I think what we need to do is look at the wording of what we've got in the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that it's clearer.
Okay, any other points before we move on? Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to the internal audit progress report. I think Andrew's going to introduce this one.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this report should be presented to you this evening by Catherine Hickman, the head of internal audit, but unfortunately she's not able to be with us tonight. So you're stuck with me, I'm afraid, to give it a go at presenting it. So please be kind. But there's two recommendations here. So firstly, it's to note the progress report for Q1, so that first 3 months of the year through to the 30th of June. And then secondly, to consider and approve proposals for an in-year change to the agreed 22-23 internal audit and investigations plan. So if I could take both of those points in detail, I'll just give you a sort of high-level overview, but obviously happy to answer questions. In terms of this first quarter, as the report states, you had a comprehensive report back in June in terms of where the audit team was at that point. But the one area that I would flag in this report in terms of the first quarter to bring to the Audit Committee's attention is the debtors audit. And I know we've got Graham online, and Graham might want to comment on that, but that debtors audit received what we call a category 3 level of assurance. The vast majority of internal audit assurances are at level 1 or level 2, so level 3 is not desirable. So there are a number of issues there that the Audit Committee needs to be aware of, and Graham can give you an update. What the report attempts to do as well this time, and I'm conscious it's very much a work in progress, is, and I'm looking at pages 55 and 56. So it starts to talk about the follow-up activity that is taking place by the audit team to give you the assurance that concerns that have been raised through the audit are being taken seriously by management and are being followed up by internal audit. What I would say is I think that this report, in terms of the format of it, like we've done over the last year or so with the risk management report, needs some more work to give you some more detailed information around particularly the high recommendations in a particular report. I know the committee is very keen to see the detail of each individual report as well, and that's something that I'm keen to give you the right level of the detail as a committee. So certainly any audit that is at that level 3, I think should be subject to more detailed scrutiny by the committee. And to give you an overview of the high recommendations for all audits as well, I think is really important. And I think that table at table 1 on page 56 would be more meaningful and more useful to the committee moving forwards. We'll make sure that comes to you in November when we look at the quarter 2 position. What I would just want to focus on tonight, though, just before I finish my introduction, is the second recommendation. And the second recommendation is around considering a change to the in-year plan. And this is very much sort of on the basis of the conversations that we've had this evening around the council's financial position, making sure that we carefully manage budgets through this financial year. So what the proposal is that has been worked up for you this evening for you to consider is a change in the plan. Some audits we propose to move to next year. Some audits we propose the assurance was gained elsewhere, maybe through, for example, Ofsted or an external regulator, but bringing information to the committee to provide that assurance to you in a different way. That there is a modest saving attached to that reduction. What I would say, it would only be proposed for the rest of this financial year. I'm very conscious that internal audit is really important as part of the toolbox that you've got as an audit committee to seek assurance on the council's governance. So I'd only be recommending this in terms of the short term. The detail of what is proposed to be changed in the plan is from page 63 onwards. And I apologise that the formatting isn't so good, so it's quite actually hard to see on here, but there are shaded areas on here, and I'll just highlight them to the committee so you know what is being proposed. So on page 63, it's just one audit of Treasury management, recognising that it's very recently that internal audit looked at Treasury management. So that's proposed to be deferred this year. Then moving to page 64, there's 3 audits there that were in the original plan. So corporate governance, I already mentioned that in the update on the corporate risk register. Climate emergency, which an audit has been conducted, and I know there is a desire for a further detailed audit around carbon accounting. I'm not proposing for the purposes of this report that audit itself is deferred. What I'm saying is, as part of the internal audit plan, this specific internal audit is deferred for this year. I'll perhaps come back to that if that I probably didn't explain that very well. So I'll come back to any points that members have got around that. And then the third one there, Children's Services High Needs Block. Again, we've talked about that in the corporate risk register. And as it says, taking assurance from the safety valve work and other inspections that are taking place there. If I move to page 65, public health audit, the proposal is to defer that and move that into early next year. And asylum seeking children. Again, the Home Office challenge and scrutiny that the council is receiving on that. That's where we propose to seek alternative assurance in that area. There's nothing on page 66. Then page 67, the audit of risk management. So again, you'll need to take a view as a committee on that, but I do think that we've made significant strides in terms of the processes around risk management, as I said earlier. So that audit is proposed to be deferred. And the final thing I think just to mention is the contingency that was in the plan would be removed as part of this process. So I appreciate the committee will have views on that proposal, but I just sort of want to set that in the context of the council's financial position and the contribution that this committee may choose to make towards that situation.
Okay, thank you for that, Andrew. Obviously, welcome comments on the progress report itself. As Andrew said, we will be looking with Catherine on the format of the report to make it easier to review, and particularly to look at those high risk actions, recommendations, and what's being done about them. Are we happy that they've been reduced in risk or cleared completely? We haven't been able to do that due to extenuating circumstances, but it's definitely that will happen. As for the review of the service overall, I think what we need to be considering as a committee is whether we think there is adequate other assurance provided where these items are suggested that they're deferred or that they don't happen. And also whether we're happy that we think the internal auditors themselves will still have enough sort of audit evidence to be able to give their annual opinion that they provide. So so open it up to comments and questions. So I've got Councillor Davis first.
Thank you very much. So it's my understanding from this report, this will essentially save one FTE that will not be replaced. That's the net cost saving. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a vacancy that we've got in the team, so we wouldn't fill that for a period of time.
Yeah, fine. I mean, from the notes here, there seems to be pretty comprehensive explanation as to why in each case they should be deferred. I'm not going to sit there and work out what one person's worth of auditing is. I'll leave that to you guys to say whether this fits that neatly. So it feels like we've got the mitigation. The only concern I have is, as you say, some of these mitigations don't bring anything back to this committee. So whether there's any specifics in here that we can get to serve as evidence that this deferral reason has been carried out, particularly around some of the higher risk areas within corporate governance. For example, I think you're absolutely right. You've made great strides there. It would be a shame not to audit it and then find we drop something, maybe come back to the committee with a specific report on that. But yeah.
Ian next, because I think he had his hand up first, actually. Councillor Maher online.
Thank you. On page 56, I just wanted there's a little table about concerns due to be followed up from previous audits, 4 from 2021 and 8 from 2019 to 20. I was just wondering, normally when I've done audits, we would have expected them if it takes a long time, no more than 6 months. Are any of these giving us any risk of any description, and why haven't they been followed up and closed off?
Okay, thank you for the question then. I think this is possibly a presentational issue as much as anything, but the 4 from 2021 and the 8 from 2019-20, they have been followed up by the internal audit team, and the audit team have got assurance that those actions have been implemented now. And I think, as I said in my introduction, the way that the table is presented there doesn't really give you that sense. But I did get information from the audit team this morning to check which audits those were, and to get, if you like, my own assurance that those follow-ups have happened to the audit team's satisfaction. If I could just add as well to the previous comment that was made about the changes to the proposed plan. If Catherine was here, she was the author of this report, and she says in the report that she's still satisfied that she can provide a head of audit opinion at the end of the year, even with the reduced programme in the plan. And I'm sure with that other point as well about can we bring those sources of external assurance to the audit committee that are referenced in that final part of the report, I'm sure we can do that as well.
I have 2 other sort of minor points, if I can just quickly say. On page 57, 2.13, it's saying the consultancy management request for internal audit work has been requested and agreed in Q2. Was that already planned, or is this something new? For Dinton catering contracts, health and safety, and then right to buy. And the other thing I just wanted to ask, does internal audit carry out value for money audits?
Okay, in terms of paragraph 2.13, so within the audit plan, there has been provision for management, for officers to request ad hoc pieces of internal audit work. So in the plan that you approved at the start of the year, you would approve some days that weren't allocated against specific project areas, but there's 3 that have come through the system for quarter 2. And in terms of value for money, the objective around value for money would be something that the audit team would consider as part of the scope of every audit that they'd look at. So they're always looking for those opportunities to support management, to support officers in terms of identifying efficiency opportunities.
Do you quantify that in any monetary sense, the value for money elements of an audit? And does that equate to a certain value by the end of the year?
The short answer is no, if I'm being honest. I think, again, it's a really good challenge, though, and it's something I'll take away and discuss with Catherine in terms of how we might do that.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments? So Councillor Smith, Councillor G, Councillor Kaiser, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I have the same question about the consultancy, but I think you've actually covered that. My concern is that the author of the report has said that the revised plan provides enough coverage to provide the head of internal audit annual opinion that everything's okay, even with the reduced workload. Kind of begs the question, is it really necessary to continue with a higher workload that we have got for breathing space? If we can do it on the reduced level of audits, why do we need to do more?
Well, what I'd say in response to that is I think the committee needs to consider the internal audit plan not just from the perspective of 1 year, but to think about it over a longer period of time. And I think if I was putting forward a proposal to you this evening that was talking about a reduction over the next 3 years, I wouldn't be supporting a recommendation like that to the committee. But I think given the short period of time and the one-off nature of this, because I think that for the committee there's something quite symbolic in terms of supporting the council's plans and requirements in terms of balancing its budget and managing its budget carefully. So that's why I'm comfortable, and I know Catherine is comfortable, that we can do it for this short concerted period of time, but not as a long-term action.
Okay, that's good to hear. The other point I was going to make, item 5.2 on page 59, talked about getting the independent external assessment done every 5 years and it's due. Just kind of thinking if you can leave it to the quarter 4 of this year, is that a bit late?
Well, I think what I'd say on that is the audit team, when it was last assessed, it had, and this was reported to the audit committee at the time, it had a very high rating through that external review. Every year, the audit team does its own self-assessment against the standard, and I'm not aware of any issues in terms of slippage against the standard. But as it says, we need to get that external assessment done, if not in the last quarter of this financial year, certainly soon afterwards, to provide that assurance to the committee, and indeed assurance to external clients as well that the audit team works for.
Just a concern that it have to be done by the end of the financial year, but what just explained is no.
You, Councillor G?
Yeah, I think the only one I'm concerned about is Treasury management. And the reason is that we are going through quite a volatile period, and we've also got the outcome of the consultation into minimum revenue provision, which may or may not have a significant effect on how we manage our intercompany loans, for example, or support commercial property development and that type of thing. I would I would like it to be, I think it's the minimum revenue provision really which is worrying me in terms of how we're going to manage our treasury, but it hasn't come out yet. I would like to see treasury management come in as soon as that minimum revenue provision statement has come out with all the guidance notes. I think if we get a good review of treasury management in terms of economic review and interest rate forecasts, which we used to get and which isn't in the current treasury management report, I think that would provide some satisfaction if we had a good review of that in the treasury management report. But as soon as the minimum revenue provision comes out, I think I would like to see some sort of the internal audit look at that, because it may require significant adjustments to the way we deal with our subsidiaries, for example.
Yeah, and I'd say on the volatility point, there was an audit done quite recently, and even if there's a lot of volatility, if that audit was sound, that's saying that the treasury management is taking place appropriately. So it doesn't necessarily mean that will stop happening just because it's volatile, but we can sort of talk to Catherine about that. I was also going to say actually that this committee does review the strategy, treasury management strategy, does review the outturn reports already, which is potentially quite unusual for an audit committee. I'm not sure if it's normal for audit committees to look at treasury, but we do that and we do it regularly. So we do get assurance from that as well. Certainly on the MRP point, we can take that forward with Catherine in terms of the timing of that and the importance of it. Okay. Who's next? Councillor Kaiser, is it? Yeah.
That report will also point to some of the other reports as to how we want to see them. But I would really like to see this completed report. There's no point in just doing it and sticking it on the shelf and saying, well, we're bad at it. I'd like to know. And I'd also like to know, see people come to this meeting who are responsible for collecting the debts to explain what their action plans are, because there's two issues to this. First of all, it's not a nicety for accountancy. This is real money for the council. But the other thing that's really important, if it's the type of debt I think you're talking about, there are real people at the end of this with serious problems. Okay, and we need to identify very, very quickly whether A, we can help these people, or B, we're never going to recover that money, because we need to be realistic in today's, in basically in what's happening today. And without seeing that report, it's all right saying it's a 3 and a 2. Oh dear, dear. We need to see it.
Yeah, I absolutely. Can I just come in? I absolutely agree with you, John. And I think we do need to get more visibility as a committee on some of these reports, particularly the high risk ones. I think we also have the ability to invite people in, obviously. So if we review that report and we decide actually we want more assurance, we can obviously invite relevant officers to come in. I think that's good. And perhaps that's something we should do more often, actually. But absolutely, that is what we'll be working with Catherine on, the visibility of what we're doing. We're not just putting it on a shelf and forgetting about it, and also just the visibility of what the particular issues were that caused that risk profile. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that we really do need to get assurance on that as well. Absolutely agree. Oh, Graham.
So, sorry, I didn't mean to start with you, Chair. I didn't hear the beginning of that. I don't think the mic was on, but I presume it was about the debtors report.
Yeah, it was that we haven't seen the granularity of that report, and we don't have much assurance on what's happening as a result of it.
Would it help if I gave you a little bit of detail of what was in it and some of the actions we're taking? Do. So the high risk elements were around a couple of areas. A number of them were around how the debtors team work with services. So about making sure the debtor was raised in a timely manner, that the information was clear, and any questions or issues were resolved quickly, and they were issues found about that could be better. And then another area was around our collection facilities, in terms of if people weren't paying, the alternative methods of getting money was that we were taking. So in terms of taking that forward, and forgive me, I don't know the history in terms of why it was like that, but in terms of taking it forward, we've actually started a review of the structure of the people in post and the processes. We've already improved our relationships and working with departments and the reports that go to departments. And we're in an initial trial just about to get underway with using some different collection agencies to support collection. So hopefully that gives you, I appreciate you haven't seen the report and the detail, but hopefully that gives you a little bit more confidence and detail of, firstly, the issues and the actions we're taking to progress them. Written in the report, it does explain that whilst there are those issues and they were high risk, actually the collection had increased overall. So a lot of activity had taken place to collect a lot of debt, and also the time in the collection. But as I caught, I think Councillor Kaiser saying, there are real people, and it is important we get that right, because for them to be able to pay, we need to make sure they are aware of the payment as soon as possible, have all the information to pay, and we provide all the best arrangements to get that money in. So that point's actually absolutely right.
Do you want to come back at all?
Yeah, it's interesting you say, Graham, that we're pretty good at, or the amount of money we're collecting is pretty good. I think the danger in all these things is we pull a lever and somebody falls through the floor and we don't know quite who. And I think it's very dangerous if we lose control of the collection to outside collection agencies. It's very difficult to control those people. They're doing a job for us. They get paid on results in a lot of cases. We just need to be very minded of that as councillors, because it's our residents basically that aren't paying. And one of the things I'd like to understand would be the breakdown, whether or not it's rates or whether it's council tax, whether it's council tax or whether it's HRA. Rents in the HRA. I mean, say the HRA is pretty well funded, but it doesn't take long to eat into that £1 million reserves that it currently has.
This yes. So this report was particularly around sundry debtors. So it wasn't council tax, HRAs, etc. It was more adult social care. It'll be all the, I say bits and bobs, but all the other services we provide outside of those sort of council tax property type based services. I don't think I said we were good. Being candid, we had improved, but there's clearly some things we can do to go further. And in terms of collection agencies, absolutely agree. What's really important is to get to the right cases to collection agency. So where people can't pay, we absolutely need to support them. Both in terms of a payment mechanism that's affordable, but also wider support they may need to be able to do that in their work with, agencies, CAB, etc. But where people can pay, it's often more effective that we use some agencies that have maybe some tools and resources we don't have to be able to maximise that income in the best way for us.
Okay, thank you. And I will ask Catherine to circulate the report to all of us members. Okay. Yeah. Okay, Michael, you've been waiting very patiently. Over to you.
Just to pick up some of the points that have been discussed. First of all, picking up Councillor Smith's discussion. Typically, internal audit will have some audits they'll do on a rotation basis, as Andrew's mentioned, over a 3-year period, say. And now the high-risk areas will be done every year. And then the audit committee would actually agree what those high-risk areas are. So if you miss one of the audits that you normally do by rotation in year 1, say this year, you've got to make sure you pick it up in year 2 and 3, and it doesn't drop off the end. So picking up that point. One of the measures audit committees typically look at with internal audits is they look at a measure of points that yet to be looked at by management. So they sometimes have little tables with different points in time to look at trends, and they look at number of outstanding issues, say at the beginning of the period, number of new issues raised in the period, number of closeout, and that gives you the net still outstanding. And then over a period of time, by our 5 meetings a year, you get a trend on how actively management are taking, to be honest, the internal audit point seriously, and how efficient they are. The other thing that I think has already been raised, and I think we call our higher risk items here 3 and 4. You're quite right. Typically, the detail would be presented to an audit committee. What the point is, what the mitigating actions are, and have management actually dealt with it. And I think that would be very useful, actually. Sounds as if there were only one in this period. Just picking up Councillor G's point earlier on, I don't know if the committee's happy with Treasury management being dropped. Now, I don't know the scope of internal audits, but with interest rates rising, as we've all seen, going to rise further, and if my understanding of some of the discussions earlier on that we do have short-term borrowings, or they will be short-term very soon, that to me sounds quite a risky thing. And I don't know what strategies as part of Treasury management, and I apologise for not knowing the detail, is, has any of that interest rate risk been hedged in the past? Is there a policy on trying to match the length of our borrowing rate with our estimated income flow from the various debts we're investing?
I could just say every project is funded up front. The money is borrowed, and quite a lot of the borrowing that they do around the council is for forward fund infrastructure. So, for instance, a road won't get built until the first 100 houses, let's say. We would forward fund that, and that's what's really, I guess, going to have a major impact on us. It just means we won't be able to do those things in future.
So I think the discussion is whether we're happy for it to be dropped with the interest rate environment we're in, and do we really want the internal audit to look at that and at least assess the exposure on the council, or whether that calculation of the exposure has been done appropriately.
Yes, thank you, Mike, for raising that. I think my concern about the volatility was not about the volatility as such, but about our strategy. I think so. We might have audited it in 2020-21, but the strategy we had then may not be suitable for now. And it was that type of thing that I was concerned about, as well as the MRP. So just to clarify that point earlier, thank you.
See, we will see. I think the strategy is coming to the next meeting, so we will get our opportunity then to review that. But I think maybe we'll perhaps tweak the recommendation. We'll come on to that in a moment. Okay, Councillor Davis, go ahead.
My point really was going to be about the Treasury reports, the auditors of the process that's being undertaken for Treasury, not the actual Treasury itself, which is dealt with obviously within various financial meetings, but it's been assessed recently as compliant. I would suggest it can be dropped safely, notwithstanding Councillor G will obviously be a subject of some considerable scrutiny in many other meetings over the coming days, weeks and months, I suspect, and I would like to see those numbers going back in Treasury, as was mentioned earlier.
Councillor Smith, did you have another point?
I did. It's a mundane one, probably. Page 59, investigations, items 5.3 onwards. It's just really for me to understand, being actually a new boy, but so the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office came and did an inspection on the 24th. Does he just breeze in through the door? Is it a pre-arranged sort of thing? Does everybody get a turn eventually? And the tense in item 5.5 seems wrong, because if he came in on the 24th, then I guess we shouldn't be doing the evidence as still being completed in preparation for them.
Okay. The inspector comes every 3 years to all local authorities like Wokingham to make sure that we've been applying the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act appropriately. There's all sorts of rules and safeguards around how we would use that. As it says in the report in 5.6, we haven't had any RIPA investigations so far during this year, and in fact they are very, very minimal. It's very rarely used, but it is part of the sort of regulatory regime that an inspector checks that we've got the right safeguards and balances in place. And as it says in 5.4, Susan had some training in August around this as well. So it's something that we need to be compliant on. But that's probably enough headlines in terms of the committee.
First recommendation is to note the report. The second one, can I suggest we tweak that slightly just to take into account Councillor G's concerns and also Mike's comments. So if we said we would approve the proposals for the in-year review of 22-23 internal audit plan, but the committee agreed an additional discussion will take place with the internal auditors with regard to Treasury management and a reassessment of exposure in the light of economic volatility and the implications for Treasury strategy. How does that sound? So it's basically saying we agree it, but we're just going to follow up on Treasury management and make sure that we're happy on that particular one. Are people okay with that wording? Yeah, can I see all those in favour of those recommendations?
Can I just say, there's also the MRP point.
Oh, yes, okay, yes, good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Including, right. Right, so it now I've added on to the end, including the MRP, so that's captured as well. Okay, are we happy with what we're voting on?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, all those in favour? Okay, thank you very much. Oh, yes. Okay. He can't vote though because he's not in the room. Yeah, sadly. Okay, so the last item we have is the forward programme. So we've got quite a lot on the next meeting, so we'll have to be quite careful with the timing of that meeting. Any comments from anyone about the items on the forward programme? Obviously, particularly after tonight's discussion, we'll be very interested in the statement of accounts discussions and what decisions we make there. But there's quite a lot of other things going on in that meeting. We've also got the February meeting there. Any comments or questions on this? Is it all? Councillor Davis?
Just as you say, there's a lot in there. We've only had, 3 substantive items tonight, and it's taken us 2.5 hours nearly. I'm wondering if we can just make sure if the reports are tailored for expediency and discussion.
Yeah. So perhaps I could ask members, because it is such a busy agenda, if we can raise some of the more detailed questions in advance with officers so that we're not spending the time doing smaller minor points and we focus on the really key discussions that we want to have, that would be really helpful. Yes, Councillor G.
Might we have any of, I know officers are under pressure to produce things, but we don't have to just send it out 7 working days beforehand. If it's this long and you want questions and we want responses, would it be possible to issue the papers, all 500 pages of them probably, before the meeting?
Do you think, Andrew, can you?
Well, in advance of the meeting, I should say.
I think it might be difficult because there's quite a long sort of clearance process of papers before we even get to sort of the publication date for the committee. But I will take that away and see what we could do sort of outside of the formal publication of papers to give you as much heads up on what's coming as we possibly can do.
Councillor Kaiser, and sorry, Councillor Harper, I'll come to you as well. Sorry.
Just there isn't any provision in this for reviewing any of the reports. And that does concern me. I mean, we spoke earlier on about reviewing the debt report because it's a 2 and 3. Maybe we do it by, I mean, there's no point in us trawling through everything if it's all given a 1. But anything that's given a 2 or a 3, especially if it's revenue related, we should see that.
Yeah. Okay. In my discussions with Catherine, I'll bring up that point. I think we were moving towards circulating the high risk reports, not publishing them. But we need a mechanism, like you say, for actually following up in the public meeting on some of those points. So I will add that to my discussion with Catherine. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Harper as well.
Back to training. So we got training on the 27th of October. Andrew mentioned training in November. Is that something that's scheduled or definitely going ahead?
So I think the risk training is scheduled. The other training, is that right, is still not. Yeah, the police medal. Yeah.
The training that was scheduled for the 27th of October, we're unfortunately having to look for another date. That is the introduction to the Audit Committee, and we've just scheduled today the risk management training on, I think it's the 21st of November, and that's going to be open to all members, but we've said obviously it's primarily for the Audit Committee.
Thank you. All right. Councillor G.
Sorry, just a suggestion. Last year we had a couple of extraordinary meetings. Given the amount of work that's coming up in the next 2 meetings, is it worthwhile thinking about spreading any items or deferring any items to future meetings and having an extraordinary meeting at some point?
Anyone thoughts on that?
Squeeze it in. I'm not sure what the calendar looks like. And there's all we do now.
Okay, perhaps Andrew and I will take that away. And
Yeah.
it might be there's a couple of things in here we could defer to future meetings, but we'll come back on that. Okay, any other points? Oh, sorry, Mike. Yeah.
Do we have dates for all the future meetings, actually? That'd be quite useful.
I'll send those to you.
Thank you.
30th of November and the 1st of Feb.
Okay, any other comments before we finish? No? All right, thank you very much for all the discussion this evening. It's been really, really good meeting. So thanks very much for your contributions, and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you.